All right, so the following screencast is made by Daena Parsons within the context of the 309-406 education class at Bishop's University in the winter 2018 semester. Over the next couple of minutes that I've spent with you in this video, I'm going to be explaining my competency development throughout my second practicum, which was at Alexander Galt High School, placed within a history secondary 4 and ERC secondary 4 context. So we're going to start in the foundations section of the competencies. And we're going to start with competency 1, which is to act as a professional inheritor, critic, and interpreter of knowledge or culture when teaching students. And we're going to look at 3 different key features. So the first one that we're going to look at is the first key feature, which is to situate the discipline's basic benchmarks. And so for this part, I'd like to talk about my primary source analyses that I did with the students. The MES exam that students do at the end of secondary 4 is document-based. And so students need to understand how to look at a document and understand its main key features and how to interpret it. And so what I did is I used the National Archives in the United States' version of a document analysis, and I adapted it for a secondary 4 classroom and adapted it to our content and context. And I had them develop an understanding for documents, which I feel is understanding documents is a benchmark within understanding history as a general knowledge. And so it helped in-depth learning for the students. 2 other key features that we're going to look at are adopt critical approach to subject matter and cast a critical look at his or her own origins, cultural practices, and social roles. For the adopts a critical approach to subject matter, I did a class about second wave feminism because my focus at the time of year was on the 1970s in Quebec. And so I took the time to introduce a piece of information that wasn't included in the curriculum, which is counter-feminism in the 70s. And so students had to watch a video by the CBC archives, and then they had to understand how the women feel in the video and why did they feel that way. So just one question, but it was enough just to introduce them to content that they don't need for the exam, but that they might need just to understand their life. And for the other key feature, which was to cast a critical look on his or her own origins, I did do a lot of reflecting because I'm from Montreal. I'm born and raised. I really enjoy living in the country now because I do not live in the city anymore. But I still spent the first 19 years of my life living there. And I grew up with either more tolerance or intolerance, depending on how you look at it. But I learned more about other cultures being in Montreal. At Galt, I was faced with students who had never seen a hijab in their life. And in ERC, I was attempting to teach about the hijab, the kirpan, and different religious controversial topics. And that led to different discussions than I was expecting, but made me reflect about myself and about what it means to be a student in the Eastern Townships. So let's go back to the competencies now. So that covers the first section on foundations. I won't be touching on competency 2 for now. We're going to move into the Teaching Act. For the Teaching Act, the first competency that we're going to look at is competency 3. So to develop teaching and learning situations that are appropriate to the students concerned and the subject content with a view to developing the competencies targeted in the program of study. So in competency 3, I've picked 6 key features. The first one is basis selection of the content of teaching sequences on data drawn from recent didactical and pedagogical research. So I used a lot of things that were already used, such as the textbook and workbooks. I brought in primary source analysis that was based on the American National Archives. So that's based on research and how to actually look at a document. And then for my complex task was to create an historical Instagram for a historical figure in the 70s. So if we look here at my check brick that I created for this, we have the competency as well as the evaluated skills within it. So students could understand which competency was based on, such as retracing events or considers the aspects of society, and then which evaluated skills are being looked at, such as, situate in time and space, and establishes facts, basic skills like that. If we come back to the key features now for competency 3, so the logic of the content. So I had the 1970s. I started with a topic. So we started with second wave feminism before moving into the actual 1970s political and social development, which is done more linear, just because I thought that feminism needed to be explained in a way, because that word is used in such a way today that does not lead to students using it a positive way all the time. So I wanted to take the time for that and then move forward. And then when we look at the social, the fourth key feature, I actually condensed it to only include certain parts. So the social differences, needs, and special interests of the students when developing learning situations. So like I said, my complex task was to create a historical Instagram for a historically significant person in the 1970s, and they got to pick from a list. So they were able to take into account their preferences, whether they wanted to work on a neo-nationalist or a feminist or a nationalist, as well as using the internet as a way to connect with the students using Instagram. Selects diverse instructional approaches that are suited to the development of teaching competencies targeted in the programs of study. Throughout this LES, I did primary source analysis, I did worksheets, I did a jigsaw, I used videos as well as lectures, as well as Kahoot, and as well as quests within the textbook to find answers. And so the students really got a wide range of instructional approaches. I will not talk about the sixth key feature, simply because I do not believe that I have developed on this key feature yet. The anticipates obstacles to learning posed by the content to be taught. I did not predict the harshness of the reaction to certain parts of my ERC courses, and so I believe that it's better just to say I haven't developed on this and move forward. So now let's move on. Competency 4, I will not touch on at this time. Competency 5 is to evaluate students' progress in learning to the subject content and mastering related competencies. So for this one, the only key feature that I chose was to gather information as students are engaged in learning situations in order to identify their strengths and weaknesses, and to review and adapt this order of teaching accordingly to help. So I had the class, and so for this class, what I actually did was I condensed 2 of the classes together because I had less time with them. And so I was able to see their strength in understanding material and then move forward with it as a condensed class. So if we return back to the competency list now, competency 6 will not be touched on at this time, simply because I don't believe that it's necessary at my level of development. So let's move on to the social and educational context competencies. So again, competency 7 won't be touched on, but I'm going to look at competency 8 and information technologies. And so I was lucky enough to be in a classroom that had Chromebooks and had Google Classroom. And so I believe that I developed greatly on the ICT side simply because I got to use this program. And so what I got to do is I put in topics on the side. So let's say 1970s in Quebec, which is what I was teaching. And then students could click on these tabs and fall right over to our classroom. And so they could see, their analyses. They could do it online and return them. This is one of my history groups. I could send out feminism handouts, as well as like their jigsaw. And I've created a tab for their actual project. So they were able to go in and, let's say here, the Instagram project slides template for final submission. I can see who's done, who isn't, and then their development. So if we go back to this now, and we move back up to the competencies, and we're going to continue within the social and educational context. Maybe not. That might not work. All right, let's go back up here and go through this. The website's not completely formatted yet. And we're going to look at competency 9. I never had a chance really to cooperate with like parents or community partners, so I don't think I've developed on this competency yet. Competency 12, I did work with another student teacher who was teaching my enriched history, so EH group. We were talking about feminism and what I was teaching, what he was teaching. But aside from that, I really didn't develop on this. So we're going to move forward in competencies to the professional identity part. For this section, all right, so we're going to look at competency 11, which is to engage in professional development individually and with others. And for this section, we're going to look at 2 key features. So take stock of his or her own competencies and take steps to develop them using available resources. So I believe that I used the class log, even though I was late for most of them, as well as the one that we did for EDU315 as a good way to reflect. And that moves into the other key feature, which is to reflect on his or her own practice and makes the appropriate adjustments. So I spoke a lot to other student teachers that were placed at Galt, and I bounced ideas off of them, as well as ensuring that what I was doing seemed logical for adaptations that I was doing for students and stuff like that. If we go now to competency 12, maybe not. Competency 12, there was 3 key features that I wanted to hit on. So understand the value underlining his or her teaching, respects the confidential value of certain aspects of his or her work, and avoids any forms of discrimination towards students, parents, and colleagues. So I had a situation while I was in the classroom where a student's mom pulled her out of school and said that there were people harassing her, other students, and my AT. This came to a point where my student was no longer coming to school and was no longer completing her work. And it was required of me to continue to send her all of the information and make sure that she had access to everything. And so we did an in-class open book test that she could do at home. So what I decided to do is I scanned all of the pages in the textbook and included those in an email to her, as well as posting the activity simply for her on Classroom, which you can do, post it to only one student. And I tried not to discriminate towards this student, regardless of her parents' decisions and actions, because there were other things that happened with this parent that I shouldn't really discuss just for the confidential nature. Developing this competency, that to me, it was my job to make sure this student got the best of her education. So that's how I see that I developed the 12 competencies. So really, to finish up, I believe that I developed all of these competencies that we talked about and key features through different ways, involving the work that I did with students, my way of having relationships with them, as well as my teaching level of professionality. And yeah, so thank you for watching.